The first thing I want to talk about is RFID is very diverse. There's a lot of different technologies involved in RFID, and not a lot of people are aware of just how big the diversity is. So in very basic terms, there's two types of systems: passive. Those systems modulate magnetic fields to derive power from readers and communicate with those readers. And they come in three basic forms: frequencies. Low frequency, which is the type of tags that are used in implants, PET chips. And the reason for that is that the data can communicate through flesh and not be absorbed, the signal's not absorbed. Then there's high frequency, which is typically used for access key cards and the like. And then there's ultra high frequency for other things. They all have different advantages, disadvantages. Then there's active systems, and active systems have a battery, a power source. They transmit, and much like in the same way your mobile phones or Wi-Fi networks or radio beacons work. And in essence, a mobile phone, a Wi-Fi network, and a radio beacon all have a unique identifier. So in effect, they are an active RFID system of some sort. Data protocols vary. The air interface, the way that the data moves from reader to tag and back. There's some ISO standards, but most are proprietary. Encryption standards are almost non-existent. Very high percentage of proprietary encryption, which exchange effectiveness for speed and convenience. And that's mostly due to limitations in power and processing in the tag. Normal RSA, banking-style encryption would take a very long time for this low-power processor to set up a secure channel. So I'm diving right into DIY RFID implants. This is some of the stuff that I kind of toyed with on my desk. There's a standard reader you can get for $30, that blue one. Has a TTL, interfaces with microprocessor readily. You can just buy it and put it in your own projects. Next to that is three examples of different glass tags. The really, really big one is for cattle and large animal use. Then the smaller one down is a 3mm by 13mm cylinder, the one I have in my left hand. The smaller one still is the size of standard PET chips, and it's the size of the tag I have in my right hand. And that can be injected. It's small enough to fit into an injector kit. Then there's just some other gear there. I'm going to try to slide through this pretty quickly. There's an example in my hands, the EM4102, which is the type of chip in the tag in my left hand. It's a 125 kilohertz low frequency tag. My right hand has a high tag, which has more capability, and I'll talk about that here. Little X-ray image in my hands that actually took quite a bit of finagling to get. I can't believe how convoluted the healthcare system is in the U.S., but the reason why I chose this area in the hand is illustrated here. You have two major nerve bundles, but then in between it's fairly devoid of major nerve fibers, and it's kind of squishy. There's a lot of padding there to absorb shock and things and to protect the tag. So there's some detail on the left hand. That's the tag before it went in. There's the tools that were used to put it in. That's just immediately after. That's me with the reader doing my first access control project. That's the scar that was left about a week later, and that's the scar that's there today. Just a little thing, you can see it there. Right hand has a Phillips high tag, and this is a little more interesting. It has some crypto security features, not a lot, about 40 bits, but it's enough to ward off kind of momentary attackers. It also has 2048 bits of read-write memory, which is kind of cool. You can store data on it, you can change it, and as Mark said, you can put viruses on it, apparently. So there's the tag before. There's the gear used to put it in. There's my doctor, just a family doctor. We'd used a PET implant tag. We took the PET tag out, threw it away, put the high tag in after sterilization, and then it was a 2-second deal. Come on, button. There we go. So that's immediately after, and that's today. Daily use. So with this enhancement, I can get into my front door, hacked a little, deadbolt system there and by adding on RFID as an authentication method. You can still use the key, you can still use the PIN code, but I just wanted to add the ability to use an RFID tag. And you can use a key card or the implant, either one. FireSafe was modified to allow PIN code access or RFID tag. That's me getting into my car. This is a different application. I only wanted to get into the car. I didn't actually want to use the tag to start it because there are security issues course, if somebody were to get my tag ID and somehow emulate it. So getting into the car is great because then there's a hidden key and I can use my knowledge to get the key and start the car. Keyboard, ripped part of keyboard, modified a reader, put it in there, and use that to log in. And I have that set up here if anybody's interested. You can see that happen. I can also start my motorcycle, and this is a little different. I just went ahead and said, yeah, let me start the motorcycle because it normally stays in my garage, and I'm not too scared of somebody who wanted to break into my garage is probably going to take the bike regardless. Active RFID. So I actually use active RFID in my daily life too after having my laptop stolen, and the police said they couldn't do anything about it even though I suspected the neighbor. So I got this locator device. It's just a standard locator, active RFID system. It has a reader with a directional antenna and two tags it comes with. I ripped the tag apart and put the 3-volt regulator on it, dipped it in some plastic, took my laptop, took it apart, and implanted it there in the laptop. So now I can find my laptop if it's stolen. The range isn't great, but you know, it's enough to tell the police, hey, it's in there, go get them. The other thing about it is interesting is normal active RFID, typically the transmitters constantly transmit, which also can be a security and privacy issue. But this system is set up specifically so the tags don't transmit until the appropriately paired receiver tells them to. So the receiver has to say, hey, I'm looking for you, then the tag responds. So that's kind of an interesting setup. Public reaction. Angry. I got a lot of angry emails, calls, and things like that. People wanted me to go away, and they were saying that I was somehow helping, you know, the conspiracy. This is just kind of a little thing that I thought up, and the cycle of fear that I've noticed when talking to people. So when people come to me and they're angry about things, and I try to engage them in conversation, but usually, you know, they're afraid of misconceptions about the technology. They think that somehow the GPS satellites are communicating with this tag, which really only has a 3-inch read range, and somehow reporting my location. Can't they track you? The elusive they. So, you know, they're afraid of something they're not sure of. They take action because they're afraid. Then people that know about it respond, usually poorly. Interaction reveals that to the people that they really don't know what it is they're talking about. And what's interesting is that they have a new fear then, and that fear causes them not to want to learn about the technology. They don't want to engage because they somehow feel that if they learn about it, maybe their fears are unfounded or whatever. But it's a cycle that repeats quite often. So the concept is that, you know, somehow now your body is up for sale and companies and governments are vying for it. This is my image misappropriated. My X-ray image is used all over the place, but I think it's kind of interesting to do a Google search on it once in a while and see where it's been used. Mark of the Beast, of course, has to come up. This is the email that I got, I think, the second day. The first email that I got actually was, you're the devil's mouthpiece. And I thought that was kind of interesting. So what I notice is a fear that somehow this is going to be compulsory. I'll never take that stupid chip in my hand, taking it meaning they're just going to have to take it. Just very interesting emails. I got a lot of them, but I'm just kind of showing the reaction that I've been getting from certain segments of the population. Security. Many RFID tags used today are not designed with security in mind. The IDs can be easily read, a standard reader, and leaves them open to attack. But in a lot of contexts, that's usually irrelevant. But in some contexts, it's not. Of the RFID tags that are designed with crypto security features, most have been cracked or otherwise defeated. Entire systems need to be designed with comprehensive security features and not just rely on the RFID tag's encryption mechanism to secure the system. Example of that is Texas Instruments DST tag. It's used in this key fob, which is ExxonMobil Speed Pass in the US. It's used to buy gasoline, and I think you can buy French fries at McDonald's. And then the same DST tag is used in some automobile keys to immobilize the system. It's a 40-bit cryptographic key. It emits a factory-set 24-bit identifier and authenticates itself through a challenge-response mechanism. So there's the DST tag there being used for the Exxon Speed Pass. These guys at Johns Hopkins were able to use 16 parallel FPGAs and basically crack the algorithm in not a lot of time, 2 hours. So they broke the algorithm for 5 different DST tags and created a common algorithm out of that. And they just set up a simple system that can randomly attack anybody with a DST tag. So they were out stealing cars and stealing gas. Kind of interesting. That site is no longer available, but I think you can go to the cache version somewhere on the internet. Failure. Basically, that security mechanism failed. And the problem is once they gained access to the algorithm, they could use it on anybody that had one of those tags. Possible remedies: stronger encryption based on open standards, not proprietary standards. Rotating one-time use keys that are written to read-write memory blocks. There's more of that in the paper that's published. Overcome power processing limitations to merge smart card technology, which is actually a small processor of immensely more powerful capability, with the contactless features of RFID. Or you can get these. These are Faraday cage pants made by a friend of mine, Mikey Sklar. He keeps his keys and everything in those pants, and nothing can be read through those Faraday cages. The severity of the security issue depends on the context. So this is kind of where we look at the different uses. Business use, where there's typically high risk involved. Payment systems, high security access, medical records, those are all risky business. The attacks can be random because the systems are common. So you've got a Verichip system, or Positive ID, or whoever they are now, to access medical records. Well, there's other mechanisms to secure that system, but the tag itself is completely unsecured. And the system is common. So in a payment solution, let's say you have your credit card. Well, that credit card now, this RFID enabled, it's a common system. So any attacker can, once they figure out the system, they can attack anyone with a credit card. They don't have to know that person. It could be random. Then they know exactly what to do with that data. They can go anywhere and use the data and buy things. So the common design makes it easy to attack and expensive to modify. It's been deployed, so to modify that system, you have to replace millions of readers, millions of tags. Personal use is low risk, even though it's your front door, which seems risky. It's pretty low risk because the attacks have to be extremely targeted. With a DIY context, it's random design, so there's not a common system. You're not quite sure what you're walking into as an attacker. Other things that come into play are things like the reality of attacks. So my car has RFID in it, and after talking, I came out to find my car burgled. And I almost wished at the $500 price tag of that window that they had used my RFID tag to get in and just take the $5 worth of change that they took. Privacy issues. So implants like mine have a 3-inch read range. Reading the tag is deliberate and consensual. Logs, if kept, are mine and mine alone. Garment tags and other types of tags can be read at a greater range. These could be used for tracking, which I put in quotes, which is really just logging, possibly without consent. And the thing that I want to make clear here is that tracking and logging are things that we do every day, every time we make a phone call or use a credit card. It's not locating. And I reiterate that here. RFID is an identification technology, not a locating technology like GPS, RF beaconing, or mobile phone triangulation. Logging, when a person was aware, is truly standard practice in today's society. Loyalty cards, computer logins, credit cards, mobile phones, traffic toll tags, they all keep data of this type. So how do we proceed? Focusing on RFID or any single technology is a waste of energy, in my opinion, particularly when trying to somehow eradicate the technology or stop it altogether. Instead, I think that intelligent legislation needs to be created to broadly address the real issues behind those concerns and not control technologies that enable the issues to arise in the first place. This is just something that I threw together because I'm dealing with a slightly smarter crowd here, so I just had to rip out a bunch of other stuff. But this is just something that I thought of this morning. Regardless of the technology, be it RFID, biometric scanning, credit card purchases, mobile phone location, this is just something I'm putting out for discussion. There should be awareness, consent, control, and licensing. And so just quick thoughts on what those mean. Awareness. Person, user, employee, customer must be made aware that such technologies are in use and who to contact with questions and concerns about it. Also, public awareness in general needs to be raised, which slowly I think is happening. But unfortunately, RFID, I think, is getting the bulk of the attention, while meanwhile there's facial recognition systems, biometric systems, systems that enroll you just simply by walking through an area, and you don't know. At least with RFID, you can opt out by leaving the card home, shielding it, or otherwise not using it. Consent. Systems should be designed around the idea of consent, difficult as it may seem in some situations. RFID cards could be designed with momentary switches that only enable the antenna when it's intended to be used. An example would be like an access card for work. You have a badge, it's got a card in it, and if you need to go through a door, you just give it a little squeeze which connects the antenna, and only at that time can the card be read. Every other time it's inactive, you can't read it. So that's a consent process. Another example is the U.S. government issued me a Nexus card, which allows me to travel quickly to the Canadian border. And they issue that with a copper sleeve and instructions on how to keep the card in the sleeve when not used at the border. And that's a consent process. So you take the card out, you're saying, I'm allowing this to be read now. Authorization must be given for each application the collected data is used for, as well as when data is shared or sold with another party. So this idea is kind of going into the concept of legislating these mandates, where if you're involved or enrolled in the system, example would be, I went to Disney World the other few years ago, and after buying the tickets, which are very expensive, and travel and hotel and everything, I walk up to the front gate and there's a fingerprint reader, and you have to match your fingerprint to the ticket. And I thought, well, there's no notification after spending all this money that I had to do that I had to give up that biometric information. Even worse is by giving it up, I can't really change my fingerprint. Whereas if I had an RFID card issued to me or whatever, I could choose to shield it or use it to get through. But that biometric data, once given up, it's hard to opt out. You really have to depend on that third party to opt out. Not to mention, I have no idea what the license agreement is to use that information. How long do they keep it? Nothing like that. And asking these head of security there at the gate, disturbingly, nobody else had asked or even wondered if there was another option, which there wasn't. So I gave in and gave them my fingerprint. So kind of upset about that. Control. Participants should have the option to opt out and or remove their identifying data from systems in question. This can only really be mandated through legislation, I think, and basically it just says that if a company or a corporation or even government is going to collect this information about you, if you choose to opt out of their system or service or product or whatever it is, that you should also have control over your data, be it biometric or RFID or otherwise. Citizens should always have manual or anonymous options. The presentation about the Japanese universities, where the entire university had payment systems set up for RF cards. They put cash into a terminal, it charged up their card, and then they use their card everywhere. Well, their card identifies them as buying this piece of pop or whatever it is that they're buying, and they should have the option to have an anonymous purchase at that machine. So this is something to think about, because by mandating that you can only use an identifying payment technology, that's kind of against the rules, in my opinion. And this is kind of an odd concept, but licensing your data. In a quote unquote free society, commercial interest usually spurs the efforts to collect this type of data. Citizens should realize that their mundane activities have value, and companies and even governments should pay to collect and license that data from you. And that license term should favor the data supplier, you, and to integrate the previous points of consent and control. And I flew through that, so if there's any questions.
Yes, ma'am.
The family doctor that implanted the right hand, he's kind of a techno guy anyway, and so the doctors that were involved, both the cosmetic surgeon on the left hand and the family doctor that did the right hand, they were clients of mine at the time. I was doing medical systems management, and so I knew them very well. And so I don't know if you noticed, but in the slide, he didn't even have gloves on, which probably is a no-no, but we just kind of talked about it. He mentioned a consent release form, but we never even got to that. He just kind of said, yeah, that sounds good, and what do you think? And actually I talked quite a bit about personal responsibility in the DIY space, because you are kind of going on an adventure of your own there. You take responsibility for your decisions, and I believe that if something went wrong, I'm not going to hold them accountable. I'm the one that wanted to get done, so.
I have
What's the reason to go ahead and get this done?
To design this line of research instead of developing receiver for signals.
Right. So why do this rather than look at medical research and other things? Well, I guess the easiest answer there is that I'm not actually a researcher. I'm just a hobbyist. So there's a huge amount of people that are interested in the technology and using it for their own purposes. As to the danger of it, the concern about cancerous tumors and things, there's a lot to read up on, and I make mention of that in the paper that's published. Ideally, not ideally, but most importantly, is that in the DIY do-it-yourselfer community, we use tags that typically are not meant for implantation, and therefore they do not have a coating on them, that anti-migration biobond coating. And in my personal opinion, I think that coating is probably more responsible for these effects in these animals, and so far no human has gotten sick or had any cancerous reaction, but there's a lot to read up in those studies. A lot of the studies are dealing with animals that are prone to cancer, or they're doing toxicological studies involving cancer. They were just surprised to see tumors around the implant and not tumors elsewhere in the body. So there's a lot of reading to do. But as far as personally, it's just because I'm not in school and I had an interest in my own convenience applications. Yeah, that's a very good point, opt-in. And in most cases, that opt-in process does exist to some extent. You choose to use the credit card with RFID, or you can ask the bank actually now to not get it. But in some cases, it doesn't exist. An example is security cameras. Simply by walking through the tube stations in the UK, you're enrolled automatically in a biometric scanning system. And you kind of have to use the tubes, right? So to get consent before everybody enters the tube station and control, it would be rather difficult. I think the important part on a broad scale, not just for RFID, but on a broad scale for all these technologies, is to have legislation that allow you to control it, even if it's after the fact. And particularly if your data is collected for security purposes in a public space, but then that data somehow is sold to another party or used by another party, that process of transferring the data away from the system that it was intended for, that needs to be a consented, controlled process, in my opinion.
Yeah, just a question about, have you thought about the potential loss of the ability to do certain medical treatments and scans, such as an MRI, when getting an RFID tag?
Yeah, you actually don't lose the ability to get an MRI, but you lose the visibility of that area. So what happens if you get an MRI with an implant, even if you have a hip implant or a dental implant, the same thing occurs, which is that area is blurred in the image. So I'm not too concerned about it, but also I'm not concerned because in a DIY context, again, without the biobond, in a DIY context, we're kind of putting it shallow implantation at the skin level, not deep into muscle tissue. So removal is very, very easy. So if it became critical, it would come out.
And I was wondering if you would support the legislation.
I haven't read it. I'd be interested in reading it.
Well, it has three key provisions. Consent. In no instance should anyone have an implant put in them without their informed written consent. Second, no one should be tracked, or no entity may use an ID tracking device to mark in or on the person to identify the individual, or as a means of or aid in tracking that individual without the consent of the individual being tracked or identified. And then third, prohibiting discrimination. And I know Roger Clark is going to be talking about rights of people who've chosen to take implants, for example. This actually covers both sides. You can't discriminate against someone in any context, whether it's work, employment, benefits, banking plans, etc., whether they are or are not implanted or have any kind of a device in their body. They can't be treated any differently from anyone else. Obviously, from your perspective, that would prevent someone from saying, hey, you can't come in my nightclub because you have a chip in you. On the other hand, it would prevent someone from saying to me, Catherine, you can't go in my nightclub because you don't have a chip in you.
Yeah.
So those are the key provisions. It's one single page PDF, and you may want to take a look at it. I don't think there's anything you disagree with.
Yeah, I'll take a look. I think it has potential, but I think, again, it's probably too specific with mentioning of implants and not just and marks, because the fact is that even the human body itself can be used as an identifier these days, and I think that needs to be a slightly broader scope. But
It actually has a pretty broad definition of an identification device. But when you're talking about consent, written consent, obviously, I can't give you written consent to look at my face, but I can give you written consent to put something on my body that you can then use to track me.
yeah, we'll take a look at it.
Next question.
There are practical issues like going through airports, or you seem to be a little bit further on the Big Brother curve than Big Brother itself.
Yeah, there's no issues with airports, no. The fact is that I went through a metal detector several years ago, and it went off, and they asked me if I had any implants. I think they were thinking medical implants, but I said yes, one on each hand, and so they brought out the wand, right, and they ran over it, and it was actually my belt buckle, but they couldn't detect it at all. It's a very small amount of metal. Just the copper antenna really is all there is to it. It's very small.
Well, I guess we can get to our tea break. And let's thank both our speakers.